Welcome to today's deep dive. Whether you are prepping for a big meeting, trying to catch up on a complex field, or you're just insanely curious about the weird, complicated world around you, you are in exactly the right place.
You really are.
We have a truly eclectic stack of sources to go through today, and I'm so excited to share them with you. First up, we have an incredibly thought-provoking academic paper by an independent scholar named Kurtis Hagen.
Right.
It's titled Conspiracy Theorists and Monological Belief Systems. And let me tell you, it completely challenges how social scientists have been studying and labeling people who believe in fringe theories.
It really flips the script.
Yeah, it does. And then we're going to pivot to a fascinating piece by Loki Bouwiedeman regarding the genesis and structure of what he calls the alternative field. And finally, we'll layer in a poetic, fragmented, and just deeply moving text called Underground National by Suyin Juliet Lee. Her work explores the profound psychological and physical divides of the Korean peninsula.
It is quite the mix today, but there is a very deliberate thread tying all of these together. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore how we construct what we call truth and to really examine the boundaries of our beliefs.
Exactly.
We want to look at how we judge official mainstream narratives versus alternative or conspiratorial ones, and then we'll apply that same lens of inquiry to look at how the hidden, buried, or, well, underground traumas of a nation actually shape its visible identity.
Okay, let's unpack this because the Hagen paper starts off with a massive bang. He takes aim at a very famous 2012 study by researchers Wood, Douglas, and Sutton. Now, if you've ever read articles making fun of conspiracy theorists, you've probably seen this study.
But absolutely, it's everywhere.
It claimed to find this wild, seemingly unbelievable contradiction. The researchers concluded that people who are prone to conspiratorial thinking will simultaneously believe mutually contradictory things.
Right, the classic double belief.
Yeah. For example, they claim that a person might believe that Princess Diana faked her own death and at the exact same time believe she was murdered by a rogue cell of the British Secret Service.
Which, logically...
Or even crazier, that Osama bin Laden was already dead long before the U.S. raid on his compound, but also believe that he is still alive today. When you hear that, it sounds completely irrational. It sounds like a total breakdown of logic.
It definitely sounds that way, and that is exactly how that study was portrayed in the media and, frankly, by a large portion of the academic community. But Hagen provides a very calm, insightful, and honestly devastating correction to this.
Devastating is the right word.
He points out that the researchers in that 2012 study completely misinterpreted their own data. They did not actually measure settled belief.
What were they actually measuring then? Because the way it was reported, it sounded like a multiple choice test where people checked both alive and dead.
I know, right? What they actually measured on a numerical scale was the degree of credence or the plausibility that participants gave to these alternative accounts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Participants were asked to rate how plausible, convincing, or worth considering various statements were. They weren't asked to declare what they firmly believed had happened as a definitive historical fact.
That distinction makes a massive difference. Hagen brings in this incredibly relatable analogy from a philosopher named Lee Basham to explain why this isn't a contradiction at all.
The lost keys analogy.
Yes, the lost keys. Imagine you lose your keys. You might strongly suspect that you left them in the front door lock, but you might equally suspect that you left them on the kitchen counter. You find both of those scenarios highly plausible.
Exactly.
Finding both scenarios plausible doesn't mean you literally believe your keys are magically in two places at the exact same time. It just means your underlying mediating belief is simply, I am forgetful and I lose things.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the flaw in the original study's conclusion. It's so simple.
It really is.
When someone rates both theories about Osama bin Laden, that he was already dead or that he's still alive, as highly plausible, it doesn't mean they believe a biological impossibility. It simply indicates an underlying belief that the official authorities are untrustworthy and that they are likely engaged in a cover-up.
Right. They're just looking at the options.
The participant is essentially saying, I don't trust the official story, so either of these alternative explanations seem like plausible ways it could have gone down.
That makes so much more sense. But it doesn't stop there. He also dives into another study that tried to paint alternative thinkers as completely gullible.
What's fascinating here is how Hagen applies this logic to a study conducted by Swamy and colleagues in 2011. In this study, researchers presented participants with completely fictitious, totally made-up conspiracy theories.
Like they just invented them for the test.
Literally invented in a lab. For example, they fabricated a conspiracy behind the success of the Red Bull energy drink.
The Red Bull energy drink.
Yeah, and they found that people who believed in real-world conspiracies were more likely to give credence to this totally fake Red Bull conspiracy. The researchers used this to essentially argue that these individuals lack critical thinking skills and will believe anything that sounds subversive.
Which sounds incredibly damning on the surface. Yeah. If you fall for a fake energy drink conspiracy, it's hard to take your other theories seriously. Why would anyone rate a made-up story as plausible?
Hagen asks us to look at the why, and it comes down to a concept called prior probability.
Okay.
Think about it. If you are a person who is well aware of documented, real, historical abuses of power, your baseline worldview is altered.
Sure.
Take the Tuskegee syphilis study, for example, where the U.S. government tracked hundreds of black men with syphilis for decades without their informed consent, deliberately withholding treatment just to study the disease's progression.
Right.
Or look at the CIA's M-Culture program in the mid-20th century, where they covertly administered LSD and other chemicals to unwitting American citizens in an attempt to develop mind control techniques.
Those are horrific and entirely factual historical events.
Precisely. You possess a worldview where authorities demonstrably do bad, secretive things. So when presented with a new alleged conspiracy, even a fake one you've never heard of before, your prior knowledge of real conspiracies logically makes you more likely to entertain the plausibility of this new one.
You're establishing a pattern.
Exactly. You extrapolate from known abuses of power to speculative ones. A conventionalist, someone who generally trusts official narratives and ignores past malfeasance, will reject the fake theory, but they'll often also reject true, documented conspiracies simply because they don't fit their trusting worldview.
I see.
Neither side is necessarily reasoning badly from their own starting premises. They are just operating on different prior probabilities based on what evidence they choose to focus on.
Before we go further, I should probably clarify a term Hagen uses a lot. He talks about an epistemological analysis. For those of us who haven't been in a philosophy class recently, epistemological basically just refers to the study of knowledge, right? It's how we know what we know and how we justify our beliefs.
That is spot on. Epistemology is all about the mechanics of belief and truth. And that leads us to a specific epistemological label that gets slapped on alternative thinkers. The monological belief system.
Right. This is a concept from Ted Goertzel back in 1994. The idea is that conspiracy theorists have this closed-off monological worldview where they don't look at outside facts. Instead, one conspiratorial idea just serves as evidence for another.
Like an echo chamber.
Exactly. The accusation is that they just talk to themselves in this loop, completely ignoring external context and empirical evidence.
And Hagen takes serious issue with this label. He argues it is unfairly pejorative and empirically false. The claim that alternative thinkers ignore empirical evidence and only look at abstract patterns is just not supported by reality. If you look at many of these alternative communities, they are often hyper-focused on proximate data.
He uses the 9/11 truth movement as a prime example of this, doesn't he?
He does, and we need to be very clear with you, the listener, right now. We are absolutely not taking a side or endorsing any specific conspiracy theories about 9/11 or M-Culture or anything else we've mentioned.
Absolutely not.
We are strictly reporting on Kurtis Hagen's analysis of how different groups weigh evidence. And Hagen's point is that if you look at the forums and websites of people questioning the official 9/11 narrative, they are not ignoring evidence.
Right, they're digging into the weeds.
They are intensely debating highly specific technical data. They argue over the exact melting point of steel, the burning temperature of aviation fuel, the specific physics of how buildings collapse.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. I hear what Hagen is saying, but couldn't you argue that hyper-focusing on something like the melting point of steel is just a rhetorical tactic?
How do you mean?
Like, you zoom in so far on one anomalous detail that you can completely ignore the massive mountain of broader, obvious evidence. Isn't that still a closed-off monological loop?
That is the standard counter-argument from the social science establishment, and it is a totally valid question. But Hagen's counter-argument is that conventionalists, people who always trust the official story, are equally prone to confirmation bias and avoiding cognitive dissonance.
Oh, interesting.
They often refuse to even look at the anomalous data presented by alternative thinkers, simply dismissing it out of hand to protect their own worldview. So to call one group monological and closed-minded, while pretending the mainstream group is purely objective and dialogical is a massive, biased blind spot.
Both groups are just using data to reinforce their starting premises. That really shakes up how you view the line between a rational mainstream thinker and an irrational alternative thinker. And that actually gives us the perfect bridge to our second source. Loic Bauhideman, writing in 2024, explores the genesis and structure of the alternative field. But what exactly does he mean by that? Is it just a catch-all term for anything weird?
Not at all. Bauhideman argues that the alternative field, which encompasses everything from alternative medicine to fringe historical theories, is not just random, disorganized chaos.
It has a shape.
Yes, it has its own structure. It has its own genesis. It operates as a parallel ecosystem to mainstream science and knowledge. It has its own influencers, its own methods of validation, and its own media networks. It mimics the conventional field, just operating on a different set of foundational axioms.
So you have these two massive structures, the conventional field and the alternative field, sitting next to each other. You would think there would be a massive, impenetrable wall between them. But Bauhideman includes this short, incredibly crucial line in his text. He writes, "The boundaries in the illustration are blurred."
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that concept of blurred boundaries is everything. Just as Hagen showed us that the epistemological boundary between rational conventionalism and irrational conspiracy is blurred by our own inherent biases and prior probabilities, the physical and psychological boundaries we draw in the real world are equally blurry.
They aren't as solid as we think.
We like to think of borders as solid, objective lines. We like to think of our nations as having a unified, conventional narrative, but those boundaries are often fraught with hidden, contradictory realities. And that sets the stage perfectly for our final source.
Sui and Juliet Lee's text, Underground National. This is a poetic, deeply fragmented exploration of trauma, identity, and the divided Korean peninsula. She starts with this incredibly striking visual.
It's a haunting image.
It really is. It's a satellite image captured by the DMSP satellite, the Defense Meteorological Satellite Program. It's a picture of the Korean peninsula at night. And if you've ever seen this image, it stays with you.
It's very famous.
You have South Korea blazing with light, looking prosperous and hyper-connected. And right above it, starting almost exactly at the 38th parallel, is North Korea. It is just a dark, black void, blending almost entirely into the surrounding ocean.
It is a literal illustration of a boundary, a stark contrast between light and dark, prosperity and isolation. It looks like a definitive, undeniable line. But Lee's text is not just about the literal map.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Lee pivots from that literal map to what she calls the psychological location of the nation. She explores the hidden tremors, the things happening beneath the surface of that landscape. She points to a specific event on October 9, 2006 to illustrate this hidden subterranean energy.
That date is highly significant. On October 9, 2006, the U.S. Office of the Director of National Intelligence confirmed an underground nuclear explosion near Punggye in North Korea. The United States Geological Survey recorded it as a 4.2 magnitude tremor on the Richter scale. The yield was estimated at less than a kiloton. It was a relatively small test in the grand scheme of nuclear weapons, but highly symbolic in the context of Lee's poetry.
How does she use that imagery? Because it's a very specific scientific event to put in a poem.
It is literally a covered explosion. It is a muscular shock, a violent, destructive tremor buried deep beneath the earth. Lee uses this to mirror the suppressed psychological trauma of a divided people.
The covered explosion.
Yes. The Korean Central News Agency, the state media of the North, called the test a stirring time of a great leap forward in the building of a great, prosperous, powerful socialist nation. They put a triumphant, conventional narrative over it. But beneath that official story is an underground blast of pure destruction.
Lee doesn't just focus on the North, though, does she? Because that would be an easy, somewhat expected narrative. She dives deeply into the South's hidden pain as well.
She does, and the contrast is vital. The surface narrative of South Korea is one of a technological and economic miracle. It is the brightly lit half of the satellite image, but her text acts as a hidden archive of deep societal pain. She lists incredibly specific, tragic human elements to show the immense cost of that economic miracle.
What kind of human elements is she pulling from the headlines to build this argument?
She brings up the wave of celebrity suicides that have rocked South Korea, specifically detailing the tragic case of Lee Seo-hyun. He was the 30-year-old lead singer of the pop group M Street.
I remember reading about that.
Yeah, they debuted back in 2004 with an album called Boy's Story in the City and released singles over the years. They were part of that gleaming entertainment machine. But in December 2008, Lee Seo-hyun was found hanging in a Yangjae-dong practice studio.
That's awful.
And the underlying reason wasn't some romantic tragedy. It was failed stock investments and hundreds of thousands of dollars in borrowed money. The immense economic pressure of that society just crushed him.
It's heartbreaking to think about that level of pressure. And it really shatters the illusion of that bright, glowing satellite map.
And that pressure isn't limited to the entertainment industry. It extends to the very top of the political structure and down to the working class. She includes the tragic death of former South Korean President Roh Moo-hyun. In 2009, amidst swirling allegations of bribery, he fell or jumped from a mountain while hiking.
Right, the political pressure is immense.
Then she talks about the desperation of the working class, highlighting a farmer named Lee Kyung-hae. During a World Trade Organization protest, he took his own life, leaving a desperate warning that multinational corporations were pushing a brand of globalization that was inhumane, environmentally degrading, farmer-killing, and undemocratic.
She also touches on the exploitation happening around the margins of international alliances too, right?
Yes, she writes about the juicy bars located near U.S. military camps. These are establishments where foreign clients buy massively overpriced drinks, exploiting the local women who work there. It turns the bodies of these women into an underground transactional economy servicing the foreign military presence.
Wow.
Each of these tragedies, the pop star crushed by debt, the president consumed by scandal, the farmer erased by globalization, the exploited women, represents a crack in the bright, shining facade of the nation. Lee is showing us that nation building always extracts a brutal toll.
I want you to really consider this for a moment. Think about your own country, or any nation you know well. A nation isn't just a physical map with a neat border, or a 38th parallel, or a demilitarized zone littered with landmines. As Lee puts it, a nation is an embodied archive of various contradictory readings of history. It is everything happening on the surface, plus everything buried underneath.
The synthesis here between our sources is incredibly powerful. Let's look at the pattern we've uncovered. When social scientists look at people who hold alternative beliefs, they label them with a monological pathology. Why? Because it allows the mainstream conventionalist to avoid dealing with the uncomfortable evidence, the anomalies, or the historical abuses that those alternative thinkers are pointing out.
It's a defense mechanism.
Exactly. It is a psychological mechanism for burying cognitive dissonance.
You label them as irrational, so you never have to actually look at the M-cultures of the world or question the flaws in your own trusting worldview.
That's it. And in the exact same way, a nation will bury its own trauma. It will bury the suicides, the grueling economic pressures, the historical divisions, and the exploitation of its vulnerable citizens. It buries all of that under a loud, unifying, official narrative of economic progress and national jubilee.
The shiny surface.
Right. Lee mentions the singing of the aguka, the national anthem, that both the North and South share in name as a symbol of this surface-level unity. Both the psychological labeling of alternative thinkers and the patriotic narratives of nation-states require the exact same mechanism. They both require suppressing the underground truth to maintain the neat, blurred boundaries of the official story.
So what does this all mean? We have gone from the statistical analysis of how people rate the plausibility of Osama bin Laden's death to the structured ecosystem of the alternative field, all the way to the poetic imagery of a glowing satellite map of a divided Asian peninsula. How do we tie a bow on this?
I think the through line is that whether we are evaluating the plausibility of a fringe theory based on our inherent trust in authority, or whether we are looking at that glowing satellite image of South Korea, our reality is entirely shaped by what we choose to bring to the surface and what we choose to leave underground.
That's a great point.
Kurtis Hagen showed us that we are all deeply influenced by our prior beliefs. The conventionalist is just as prone to ignoring evidence as the alternative thinker. And Swayan Juliet Lee showed us that the boundaries we draw, whether it is the epistemological boundary between truth and fiction or the physical boundary between North and South, are highly subjective and usually built on top of a buried archive of pain and contradiction.
The boundaries are blurred.
The boundaries are constantly blurred, and this raises an important question, something we haven't touched on yet, but that I want to leave our listener with today. We have talked about physical borders and psychological boundaries today, but think about the digital boundaries being drawn around us right now by algorithms.
Oh, wow.
If our nations and our minds naturally bury uncomfortable truths to maintain a neat, conventional narrative, what happens when our social media feeds and search engines are literally programmed to do the exact same
I would
thing?
just amplify it.
Think about it. Algorithms are designed to hide the underground reality, the conflicting viewpoints, the anomalous data, the uncomfortable facts, and only show us the bright, conventional surface that keeps us comfortable and scrolling.
That's terrifying.
If our judgment of what is true is already so heavily influenced by our underlying trust in authority, how much of your daily digital reality is actually based on hard, objective evidence? How much of your feed is just an algorithmic, monological belief system quietly speaking to itself, telling you exactly what you already wanted to hear and burying the rest underground?
Man, that is a heavy, necessary question to carry with us. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We explored some dense academic theory, dissected the structure of alternative beliefs, and sat with some truly profound poetry. We challenged a lot of the neat little boxes we use to categorize the world. Keep questioning those boundaries, keep asking what's buried underground, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.